Good morning to those participants in the Americas, good afternoon to those in Europe, and good evening to those further east. Welcome to the second webinar of CEBRI's Europe Group. My name is Ronaldo Veirano, and I am the coordinator of the group, working closely with Ana Paula Tostes, CEBRI's senior fellow responsible for the group's activities. The group is also extremely fortunate to count with the mentorship of Ambassador Marcos Galvão, Brazil's ambassador before the European Commission, based in Brussels and a trustee at CEBRI. At our first meeting on October 23, we welcomed as our keynote speaker, Ambassador Rui Vinhas, General Director for European Matters at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Portugal, who made a very interesting presentation about Portugal's upcoming presidency of the European Union and the relationship between Brazil and the EU. Today, following up on Ana Paula Tostes' original plan of exploring further the European Union's current geopolitical, political, and economic scenarios, we are extremely pleased to bring you three very distinguished guests. Mr. José Manuel Durão Barroso, former Prime Minister of Portugal and former President of the European Commission, who will be our keynote speaker. Armínio Fraga, founding partner of Gavi Investimentos and former President of the Central Bank of Brazil and also a trustee at CEBRI, who will act as moderator of today's debate. And Mr. Demetrio Magnoli, international commentator of Global News and a trustee at CEBRI, who will comment on Mr. Durão Barroso's presentation. After the presentation and following Mr. Magnoli's comment, the panel, as well as our audience, will have an opportunity to submit questions to Mr. José Manuel Durão Barroso. So please don't be shy and send your questions through the chat icon in your screen. Without further ado, I am very pleased to turn the floor over to Mr. Armínio Fraga.
Thank you, Ronaldo. It's a real pleasure to be here hosting a very distinguished guest and friend, José Manuel Durão Barroso. If you allow me, for those who were asleep over the last 3 decades, I'll give you a brief summary of his history and achievements. He's a lawyer by training, an academic, politician. He was first elected before turning 30 for the PSD in Portugal. Since then, among other things, he has been Minister of Foreign Affairs, Prime Minister of Portugal, and then President of the European Commission for 2 terms, which is he is the second person and only to do it for 2 terms. So 10 years. He has numerous honorary degrees, honors, board assignments, commissions, and so on. I won't list it. He now has teaching affiliations with my alma mater, Princeton. He's very happy to see that. I didn't know, my fault. The University of Geneva and the Catholic school in Lisbon. He's a non-executive chairman on Goldman Sachs, and he's a very dear friend of Brazil. And with that, José Manuel, the floor is yours. We look forward to your remarks. You're on mute.
Yes. I was saying obrigado. Thank you very much, my dear Armínio, for your extremely kind words of introduction. It's always a pleasure to be with you in Brazil. In fact, I was in CEBRI before, physically, in Rio de Janeiro. This time we have to do it virtually, and I would like to say how delighted I am to be also in your company, Armínio, and also Demetrio Magnoli, and of course, following the introduction by Ronaldo Veirano. So to all my friends in Brazil, my warmest regards. As you know, I have very strong connections with Brazil. My father was born there. My father was, in fact, a Brazilian citizen, and I keep those attachments. One of the things I miss more now because of COVID-19 is that I'm not being able to travel, namely to Brazil. Now, and I know that we are being followed outside of Brazil, and so I was invited to speak about European Union and what I can do. We have also experts on European Union in CEBRI and in this panel, so I'm not going to say what I'm sure everybody knows. What probably I can do better, or at least I can make a contribution better, is to share some of my experience of many years dealing with European Union, not only as president of the Commission for 10 years, but also as a prime minister and foreign minister, so at least for 15 years in the European Council. Because in '92, when I became foreign minister, the foreign ministers were members of the European Council. We were at that time only 12 countries. Now we are, as you know, 27, following the Brexit. So, but when it comes to the current crisis, my first temptation is to compare this crisis with the previous one, precisely that I was living from Brussels in the European Commission. And the reality is that at that time, we were able, but in a very, very difficult way, with lots of contradictions and frustrations, we were able to save the euro. You remember what was being said at that time, that Grexit, in fact, the word Grexit, Greece leaving the euro, came before Brexit. And the market sentiment, and most analysts, including extremely qualified economists and the political commentators, they were saying that it was unavoidable, Greece leaving the euro, and also they were putting as a credible scenario the collapse of the euro as a currency. The fact is that euro today is the second most influential and important currency in the world. It was not easy. We had to build everything from scratch. We had to, first of all, make some governments accept that we could make and should make bailouts to support those of our countries that were not able to access the markets. And in a very incremental process, sometimes people will say muddling through, yes, complicated, painful, politically, economically, socially. The reality is that we kept the integrity of the euro, and also that the economies that were more affected came from that crisis much stronger than before. In fact, with growth levels higher than the other that have not made those reforms following this crisis. Now, when we have this crisis, of course, it's very different from the previous one. The previous one was a financial crisis, in fact, originated in the United States, banking and financial crisis with the famous Lehman Brothers moment that contaminated Europe and exposed some fragilities, weaknesses, systemic weaknesses of Europe, not only the European banking system, but also the very high levels of public debt. And so it became a sovereign debt crisis, not only a financial crisis, and it became also an euro crisis, because the euro, the currency, the European Economic and Monetary Union, was not prepared to face this situation. And so we had to, as I've told you, take a lot of measures. And in fact, we took some that were unthinkable before that crisis. And that confirms the saying of one of the founding fathers of the European community, Jean Monnet, who famously said, l'Europe se fera dans des crises et comme des réponses successives à des crises successives. I mean, it means Europe, the European community, is going to be made through crises, and there's successive crises, successive responses to successive crises. Now, this crisis is not a financial crisis, it's a pandemic, it's a public health crisis, but of course having a huge impact from an economic and also financial point of view. In a way, bigger, because the drop in GDP, the increase in unemployment is being bigger, and also not only in Europe, in many other parts of the world. But there is hope. There is hope that we may come back earlier than the previous crisis, the famous V curve. I'm not so sure about the V curve. Anyhow, because it's very much linked to an external factor, the end of the pandemic. By the way, that's why vaccines are so important. And by the way, the news about vaccines are very encouraging. And by the way, as you know, I recently accepted to become the chair of Global Alliance for Vaccines, Gavi. I will start my mandate in 1st of January 2021, so some weeks from now. Precisely because I think we can help bring this to an end globally. So ensure the, let's say, equitable delivery and distribution of vaccines all over the world. Now, this time it was possible for the European Union to have a stronger response. Just to give an example, it took 4 years, the European Central Bank, to announce the famous policy, whatever it takes, by Mario Draghi in 2012. Not because they were not ready, but because they felt there was not sufficient support from the government, and also there was not sufficient institutional preparedness to face the crisis in the euro. 4 years. Now it took less than 4 weeks for the European Central Bank to announce the no limits policy, so that they can not only increase the famous monetary bazooka, but also they can use other instruments if necessary, unconventional measures of monetary policy that were considered completely unorthodox and forbidden by some countries back in 2008. Like, for instance, debt mutualization. Now, as a plan for recovery from this pandemic, there was a program that was adopted unanimously. There are still some problems. We can come to that, but the program was already approved unanimously, called Next Generation European Union, a recovery plan, 750 billion euros. So in dollars, it's of course considerably more. And this is going to be financed through public debt raised by the European Commission on behalf of all the member states of the European Union, not only the Euro countries, all the countries of the European Union. This is debt mutualization. And I remember when myself and others, back in 2009, 10, 11, spoke about Euro bonds, some members and some of my big partners, including some of very good friends, said, only over our dead body. We will never have this kind of debt mutualization. It's happening now because the crisis is a driver for these steps forward. So this kind of response that was possible now, not only in monetary terms, but also in debt mutualization, and generally speaking, in terms of fiscal activism as well. This was possible for many reasons. We can go in detail afterwards if you want, but mainly because the taboos were broken during the former crisis, and now there was an understanding, namely in Germany, from Angela Merkel, that we need to do more, that we could have a systemic crisis that was not only affecting Italy at the beginning, because epicenter of this crisis in health terms and also the market perception was Italy, and Italy is one of the biggest economies in the world, a member of G7. In fact, it is the 8th economy in the world, bigger than Russia, Canada, South Korea, and others. And they're very central, because when people speak about the periphery, sometimes they forget that the north of Italy is part of the core Europe in terms of industry, but also in terms of markets. So this was one of the reasons why it was possible to have a strong response. So my point is, I continue to be a very committed European. I'm no longer in public office. So as I usually say, my level of sincerity is increasing day by day. I'm not here representing the European Commission, representing the European Union, not at all. I know well also the problems inside the European Union, but I'm very sincere when I tell you that I believe that the resilience of the European Union and of the euro is higher, stronger than usually assumed, namely in Anglo-American world. That is my honest understanding. But we have to understand, and I know some of you are experts on Europe, that we have to understand that when we deal with the European Union, we are dealing with a very complex reality. It's not a state, it's not the United States of Europe. And by the way, I think we are not going to have United States of Europe in the foreseeable future. But it's also not an international organization like, let's say, NATO, or the Council of Europe, or United Nations, or Mercosur, another case of a region. It's nothing comparable. It's completely different because it has supranational elements that are very strong. So it's something in between. And so it's going to continue to be an incremental development, step by step, as it was said also by the founding fathers of the European community. But sometimes steps are bigger than others. And we are one of those moments. I will not say it's a Hamiltonian moment, as someone said in the European Union, but it's certainly a very important step. And because of other geopolitical developments, and that's now the point I would like to mention now, that we were already developing before the pandemic, but the pandemic has been reinforcing, deepening, enlarging, in some cases, accelerating. We are seeing now in Europe a discourse with and words matter, of course, about European sovereignty, strategic autonomy, a more geopolitical Europe. And this is possible also because of Brexit. I will not now comment more on that. Brexit, if you want, we can come to it. But let me tell you that this package that was approved now, the financial package and the budget for the next 7 years, I know from experience, it would have been very difficult, if not impossible, with United Kingdom member of the European Union. I participated in 3 negotiations of the budget. In budget in Europe, it's 7-year cycles, 7 years. Let me tell you, it's the most difficult negotiations I ever been in my life. More complex than the peace process in Angola or the independence of Timor-Leste, East Timor. It's very, very difficult and complex. And the leaders of the frugal countries, as now they are called, the frugal, those want less, let's say, funds, less ambition in budgetary terms, were always the British. With different governments, by the way, from Blair to Gordon Brown to David Cameron. So, but also geopolitically, what we are seeing now is in fact a very interesting debate between what we can call a conception of a Europe space, Europe as a market, basically as a market, and our Europe, political Europe, basically as a power. L'Europe espace, l'Europe puissance in French, if you want to refer to another language, of another European language. So I think it's the challenge for Europe now, and now this is being discussed. For instance, I just now received here in Lisbon, speaking to you from Lisbon, I received this week at Católica University, the Prime Minister of Portugal, that Portugal will have the rotating presidency starting 1st of January. And that was what he said publicly, by the way. The real challenge will be to combine the idea of being more political, more sovereign, at the same time remaining open. So the concept of a strategic, open strategic autonomy, that's what the discussion is going to be. But with Britain out, it's clear that France will probably, the traditional geopolitical orientations of France will probably have a stronger influence today in the European Union. But of course, as you know, in Europe, nothing happens without an agreement between France and Germany. It's not sufficient, but it is a necessary condition for anything to happen in the European Union. And sometimes people, some of the observers, say, oh, it's Germany. At the end, Germany is the power because of its dimension, because also of Angela Merkel, by the way, a very good friend of mine. I think it's a mistake to think about that. It's true that Germany is the biggest economy and also demographically the bigger country in Europe, the European Union. But France, by the way, now that Britain is leaving, France will be the only permanent member of Security Council from European Union. And France, as I always say, it's the only country in the European Union that is north and south. Geopolitically, internally, it has a very important outreach. Germany is north, Italy, Greece, Portugal, Spain, we are south. But France is north, is the English Channel, but also Mediterranean country. And so I think it's very important to watch this relationship between France and Germany, as always, critical for the future of Europe. Having said that, I think now, and if I may make just a general remark about what's happening globally, with the United States and the election of Biden, that was, generally speaking, not by everybody, because some populist governments were not so happy, but the election of Biden was very well received in the European Union, because, by the way, he's very proud to speak about his European origin. He's Irish-American, in fact. That's the way he presents himself. And by the way, he's saying that very bluntly to our British friends. But Biden is a more traditional mainstream politician. I know him well. When he was vice president, I had to deal, by the way, an interesting issue about PNR, passenger name record. And is a more mainstream politician, traditional, that will try, and that's probably the most important difference, he will try to revive the commitment to the multilateral order. Because he understands that if the United States wants to lead the world, and I continue to think that the United States are today the most influential, most powerful country in the world, but if they want to do it, they need to do it with others. One country alone, even the bigger country, the most important country in the world, cannot solve climate change, cannot solve the pandemic, cannot solve the, let's say, fight against international terrorism, or other global issues. We need alliances. And I think, to be honest, we are not going to come to a complete status quo ante. I remember also many contacts I had the pleasure to have with Obama. In fact, Obama was already investing much less in Europe. Obama had not a real emotional commitment to Europe, as most to the tradition of transatlantic alliance and complicity that existed with very different presence. By the way, with Clinton. Clinton still has many friends in Bill Clinton in Europe. Obama, not so many, because he was not investing so much in the relationship. It was a famous pivot to Asia, because the United States are the Atlantic, but also Pacific power. So, and that was important from a European point of view. That's when in Europe we started to discuss, okay, we want to remain very close to the United States. We are members of NATO. As you know, almost all members, most members of the European Union are members of NATO, and the huge majority of the NATO countries are European Union countries. So, but we want to do it, but we have to do more ourselves. I said publicly once that there were two drivers after Obama, so when came Trump, there were two very important drivers for European integration: Putin and Trump. It was a little bit of a provocation, but it's true. Putin, because there was the perception of an aggression. In fact, what happened, not to the European Union, but to our neighbor, Ukraine, an annexation of Crimea. And the United States, because Trump, and in that point, I have to say I agree with him, Trump was demanding European Union countries in general, to spend more in terms of defense. And so this was the reason why now, probably slowly, but surely, Europeans are doing more in terms of defense. So we are going to see progressively to appear a European identity of security and defense. It's already in the way with the creation of an instrument called PESCO. Okay, so this is a very important point. Today, at least at European leaders level, there is an understanding, generally speaking, that with a much more aggressive Russia, a much more assertive China, a much more unpredictable United States of America, because systemically, if you think about it, it's very unstable. Basically, Obama was a response to George W. Bush. And then we had Trump as a response to Obama, and now we have a response to Trump by Biden. And in fact, Trump is not even able to make a second term. So, and with very important differences in geopolitical matters, from the general attitude to trade, to climate change, to the engagement with Europe, to the Iran agreement. So these are not minor things. Traditionally, there were, of course, differences between the Democrats and Republicans, but there was some kind of bipartisanship on most relevant issues. No longer. And let's not forget one thing. Trump got more votes now than 4 years ago, even if he lost the election now. So that has to be taken in consideration. We have no illusions, at least I have no illusions, that we are going to come to a complete, let's say, scenario, the transatlantic American-European relationship as we had, let's say, after the Second World War. Now, it's going to be with some difficulties, but certainly there will be an effort on both sides to reset the relationship. I think that's going to happen. By the way, we already see that in the signals that are coming from both sides. So just to conclude, to say that, because I like, of course, to leave time to listen to your comment and to questions and from all of you, I continue to think that European Union is going to make progress, but it's going to be incremental progress, depending also on the general geopolitical and geoeconomic context. But I may be biased. I am a pro-European. I'm a Portuguese, European, and cosmopolitan citizen. I think it's now it's not very good reputation to say we are a globalist, but I am. I believe it's important to have this sense of defending our national interest, but also in European Union with a commitment to others, to enlarge our horizons, and also globally, because we are all part of mankind. One of my greatest days in life was when I had the honor to receive on behalf of the European Union the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012 in Oslo. And at that point, in fact, I could mention that in my acceptance speech, that since the European community was created, there was never a war between all its members of the European community, European Union. And when you look back to history, there was almost not a single year of peace all over Europe. Conflict, war was the reason, was the rule, I'm sorry, the rule. And so partly because of the European Union, probably not only, but we were able to live in peace among the members of the European Union. And also I believe that globally, the European Union, certainly with its problems, but is a force for the good, for fighting some of the real challenges we have today, and to pursue some global public goods, like public health, fight against climate change, financial stability, open markets, open trade, and also culturally speaking, the free flow of ideas and the importance of freedom and democracy. So this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I'm now ready for listening to your comments and also other questions.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Thank you. Muito obrigado, João Manuel. This is an amazing strategic view of someone who, although you claim you have biases, you're well known for being analytical and gives us great comfort. I remember at one point in my life somebody gave me the following advice for investments related to Europe. You trade based on the economics and you invest based on the politics. And I think this is something that this is how I read your comments. Europe is a lot more resilient than people think. We now have the privilege of having our own colleague, trustee, Demetrio Magnoli, for those who may be listening to us outside Brazil. Demetrio is a professor at USP with a record of writing and commenting on issues that range from politics, international relations, with a geographic specialization as part of his professorship, and who will now then comment on your wonderful presentation. Demetrio, please.
Thank you, Mr. Barroso. Thank you, Arminio, Ronaldo. I will divide these brief remarks into two parts. Europe itself and Europe in the brave new world redesigned by the rivalry between the United States and China. First, Europe. Angela Merkel will step down in less than a year. This key moment for Germany and the European Union alike highlights the serious challenges posed to the European project by the rise of the nationalist right. 10 years ago, in 2010, the international financial crisis swept Europe as a euro crisis. Merkel reacted with utmost orthodoxy. Burma unfolded as a deep recession in the south. In theory, a currency union requires a fiscal union. Never accepted. 5 years ago, in 2015, the Syrian war prompted a refugee crisis and with it, a test of the European political cohesion. Merkel reacted with the most brave and dignified act of a European leader since Jean Monnet, opening the doors of Germany to almost 1 million refugees. However, partners, with the sole exception of Sweden, closed their gates. Then we saw the uprise of a string of right-wing, nationalist, xenophobic parties, including in Germany, and the Brexit shock. This year, the year of the plague, the COVID pandemics, caused strict lockdowns almost everywhere in Europe and the sudden stop of the economy. And Merkel reacted in a novel way, partnering with France to defeat the resistance of the northern frugal countries and establish a debt union. The recovery package is in fact a European Union agreement to underwrite debt for the southern countries. It's not a fiscal union yet, but it's clearly a debt union. My question, what will be the political and electoral implications of this for Germany and the northern countries? Will the nationalist right get a new boost from the debt union package? At least how the union will deal with Hungary and Poland, blocking the package because they don't accept the democratic clause attached to it. Second, Europe and the world. Generally speaking, Europe lacks a coherent global strategy. There is a chronic disagreement between Germany and France about security issues. The European Union faces rising tensions between Greece and an ever more aggressive Turkey. The aftermath of the refugee crisis, the Union relied in a pact to stem the migrant influx into Europe. Since then, Recep Erdogan has a tool to blackmail Europe. How the Union will manage a crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean. Russia will continue to challenge Europe in a series of hotspots, from the Baltic to Ukraine and the Balkans. Vladimir Putin took advantage of Trump's isolationism to project external influence and pointedly to sow discord in Europe. The Kremlin promotes right-wing parties across the European Union. Hungary, under the semi-authoritarian government of Viktor Orban, is a partner of Russia. Can the European Union speak with a common voice and stand together facing Moscow? Finally, the China enigma. The Euro crisis onwards, Germany became ever more dependent on the Chinese import market. Or, sadly, the Germans are almost silent facing the Hong Kong political crisis, the Uyghurs humanitarian disaster. There was in Germany a lot of talk about diversifying commercial partnerships in Asia. Chinese dependency is only rising. Biden will certainly stamp out America first. Probably won't pursue the kind of trade wars beloved by Trump. But military and technological rivalry is poised to become worse. The UK decided to block the Chinese 5G, but the UK is now a third country. What will be the decision of Germany and the European Union about that? Trump is out, Biden is in, but the good old days are gone forever. Despite Anthony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, the United States will be an introverted country for the time being, living in extreme political polarization. How Germany will define its place in the new world order of bipolar rivalry in the United States and China. In the European Union, how will it define its place in this geopolitical scenario? France and Germany have different answers to the later question. Macron wants strategic autonomy, his words, to Europe, and oddly, also a strong NATO. The German reply, and I quote Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer, the defense minister, illusions of European strategic autonomy must come to an end. Europeans will not be able to replace America's crucial role as a security provider. Okay, I'm done. Too much questions, no answers.
Thank you, Demetrio. Excellent comments. We're also accumulating some questions here on the side. So I think, José Manuel, it would be best if you could address Demetrio's points, and then we kind of go on.
Okay. No, thank you, Demetrio, for the very interesting questions. And by the way, each one of them could be the topic for a conference. So let me just try to give you my very candid opinion. First of all, Angela Merkel. And once again, I think the most interesting thing is if I share some experience. I know Angela Merkel before she was chancellor. When I became commission president, it was Gerhard Schröder. And in fact, we are from the same political family. So in fact, she was one of the persons, at that time, she was the leader of the opposition in Germany, who asked me to become president of the commission. Because in my party, the European People's Party, we wanted to have someone. We were and still are the biggest party across Europe. And she pushed me. So I have a very good relationship with Angela Merkel that I keep. I respect her very much. So I'm in a good position to tell you that. She has been a great leader. It's so good to have someone who is rational and reasonable in this world where so many leaders that are not so rational or reasonable. But I think that Germany is sufficiently strong systemically to resist a transition to the post-Merkel. Germany has made a strategic bet, and I think it's very sincere and very honest, linking their future with the future of the European Union and the future of the euro. Angela Merkel is also on record saying we have to support the euro because the end of the euro would be the end of the European Union. And during the financial crisis, one of the reasons myself and the Commission, we were sometimes in the G8 or the G20, telling our partners that we were going to do it, was because I was confident that at the end, Germany will do what was necessary to be done. But we have to understand, she was telling me, look, I cannot do it now. And I was telling her in English, because we speak in English, the more you delay, the more you pay at the end. And she said, yes, I know. But I have to convince my party in the coalition. I have to convince the Bundestag, the parliament, and we have to be prudent with the Constitutional Court. And I can only, for instance, accept bailout programs if it is an ultima ratio. By the way, she said words in Latin. So last resort. because if not, I cannot. And at the end, she has done the right thing then and now. Now, but to be frank, the SPD that is now in coalition with her, they are very committed Europeans, including the leadership. And the party that they may come part of the government, the Greens, the Grüne, in Germany, they are probably the most pro-European in terms of being the federalist part of. So I think, and even the liberals. Now, AfD, that extreme right or nationalist right that you've mentioned, Alternative für Deutschland, they were growing also because of this crisis of the refugees. That of course, that was the biggest driver for populism in some of our countries, including in Germany, but also in Italy and in the Central Eastern European countries like Hungary and so on. But the reality is that the Alternative für Deutschland started to be a party against the euro. But afterwards, they understood that the euro in Germany is more popular than what they think. And now their discourse is not so much against the European Union or against the euro, is against the refugees or the migrants. So my point is the following. Of course, it's not going to be easy to replace Angela Merkel, but I think with whoever wins, Germany will remain very solidly on a pro-European path, and very strongly. Some time ago, when I spoke with her, I mentioned to her the concerns some people, including myself, have about she leaving. But after 15 years, I think she has the right to leave. But she said to me, do you remember what people were saying when I came to power? That people said that I will not be able to do it, that it will be a problem after, namely after a man like Helmut Kohl before. The reality is that Germany is very strong. My opinion is that one, very strong. Now, but I agree completely with you, Matthew, that there are different perceptions between France and Germany. And you know very well why, because of history. Germany, for understandable reasons, does not want to appear and is not making a kind of a claim, a bid for global power or influence like France is. France, for instance, is a country, it's not, of course, at the level of global influence as the United States or China, but France has a strategy for the Pacific. France continues to see the world geopolitically, by the way, like the British, while Germany sees it more geoeconomically, and also because it has not the same kind of responsibility. So it's going to be a dialogue, but at the end of the day, France and Germany usually come to a conclusion. There are different perceptions, but at the end, and the example you've mentioned, Russia, the first one, we go to China. I remember, well, I was in that European Council when we decided to impose sanctions on Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. Of course, we knew perfectly well that it will not be fully satisfactory, that Russia will have to have counter sanctions. But what could be the alternatives? There were, in fact, three possibilities. To have a military conflict, and no one, by the way, starting with the Americans, and also with us, no one wanted a military conflict with Russia. That's the reality. Another possibility was to do nothing, to make a kind of a communique, a diplomatic nothing. So the decision was to have this kind of sanctions to show that it was very important for us. And it was adopted. By the way, I'm going to tell you something. As you know, those decisions in foreign policy require unanimity. The reality is that there was not unanimity. For instance, Orban, Hungarian prime minister, he was already prime minister, he said, I do not agree with sanctions, but if the majority agrees, if there is a strong consensus, I will not oppose it. This is what I call, in my teaching, consensus by default, that very often it happens. So the treaties, they say unanimity, but okay, we can. The European Union is very creative sometimes, I can tell you. It's impossible to have a European Union with 28 or 27 countries without being legally and also diplomatically creative. Is what we usually call rational or functional ambiguity. And that ambiguity that exists also between France and Germany sometimes is functional. I'm one of those who don't think that for Europe we have to be all the time in agreement. It's only natural. And when the world is so complex and unstable, sometimes a higher level of variety or diversity increases our capacity to deal with this unpredictability. So, of course, if it has to be managed, it has to be kept some level. The reality is that now, in spite of everything that has been said, the sanctions against Russia remain. There were already some countries, including Italy, saying that they want to change it. But one thing I also learned in Brussels is the following. It's sometimes very difficult to come to a decision in the European Union, but it's even more difficult to change it once we come to it. So the inertia is a. So I think that European Union is going to continue, not perfect, but it's going to continue to show some level of unity. Now, the issue of China is much more complex. I think China, the rise of China is by far the most important development politically in the last 30 years in the world. It's changing everything. Having said that, it's true what was said now. Biden is going to try to have, differently from Trump, that sometimes Trump said that worse than China for the United States interest was European Union and Germany. He's on record saying that. One day after, Pompeo had a call with all the foreign ministers of the European Union, including the High Representative Borrell. 1 or 2 days later, Trump said it, oh, more difficult than China, more dangerous is European Union and Germany. Of course, in that situation, you can imagine that European Union was not very ready to work with Trump on that matter. Now, with Biden, it's going to be different. And it's going to make it's going to be a very difficult option for the European Union, because by definition, the European Union in those matters does not like to choose. the consensus compromise. So topologically, from a position, the European Union likes to be in the middle. Now, I believe that at the end, the result will be something in the middle. It's going to be very tough on some issues, but the European Union will try to have a sophisticated strategy with China, of engagement with China. By the way, I think that's the right strategy. The idea to isolate China is completely absurd. China is the biggest country in the world demographically, and very soon it will be the biggest economic power in the world. So what we have to do is to be clear, what we agree, what we don't agree, be firm, and also, but engage on issues, because, for instance, some global issue that I've mentioned, climate change or the pandemic, or we cannot succeed if China is not part of it. My experience in the G20 was that, with all respect for all members of G20, nothing could be achieved if these three, United States, China, and Europe was not agreeing. Because Europe, from an economic point of view, the European Union is the third, one of the three most important poles in terms of trade and investment. So, and this is what I think. Having said that, it's going to be very difficult to manage that relationship for the reasons that Demetrio mentioned, and so I will not repeat, the technological decoupling and so on. Let me just make a point. Britain was the country some time ago that was the more pro-Chinese, the champion with Cameron. When, for instance, myself and the Commission, we took decisions, because that's the responsibility of the European Commission, anti-dumping against China, solar panels, the British were criticizing us, calling us protectionist. And now, with this government, and also because of American pressure, they changed completely. Now they want to be the more tough, including because of Hong Kong. That's the reality. They changed completely. While the European Union has always been a little bit more moderate. For instance, during the 10 years I was leading the European Commission, there was not a single year the Chinese were not asking us to give them the so-called market economy status, and we have never gave them to them. Why? On the basis of our criteria. They were technical criteria, but we said with a great respect. And by the way, I'm considered a friend of China because I've been working with them for many years. I was foreign minister when we had the handover of Macau to them 2 years after Hong Kong. So I know them well, and they know me also well. We have disagreements, but I was always loyal, explaining the issues to them, my perspective. And we told them, we have the highest respect for you. You have one of the biggest markets in the world, but I'm sorry, you do not fulfill our criteria of what is a market economy. So we cannot going to do it. And they understood. They did not like it, but they understood it. So that's the point. I think it's possible to have an honest, firm strategy with China, keeping engagement with them, at the same time that there are points where we do not agree, including some of the points made by the Americans in terms of the level playing field for investment. By the way, we are still negotiating an investment agreement with China. At that time, the British government wanted us to have an FTA with them. Of course, it was not realistic. We cannot have an FTA with China. So as a precondition to that, we have to have a level playing field in terms of investment and some rules, regulation. So it's a very passionate thing. So, but that's a very complex. So I think I'm already speaking for too long, but you raised so important question that I could not avoid trying to respond to them.
This is superb. Thank you. We have a few questions. I'll try to do justice to them. They're excellent questions. And also, Ronaldo, feel free to jump in if you wish. There's one that overlaps with something I wanted to ask that is a pretty natural question for us down here. And that has to do with the potential for progress in the deal with Mercosur. And right now, we are struggling with a number of issues, including the Amazon and related climate change related issues. So if you could shed some light on this. For us, needless to say, here at CEBRI, and we try not to impose a consensus on anyone, just as you just described brilliantly in Europe. But I would guess we must be very close or at a consensus relating, sadly, some of the things that are happening here in the world of foreign policy and policy regarding the environment. But I wonder if you could tell us how you see this in the short term, difficult, but in the medium term as well.
So as you know, Arminio, in fact, I think I said that when I was with you in CEBRI, in the Casa das Conchas, no? I'm a big fan of the European Union Mercosur agreement. I've been trying to get it for many, many, many years. I mean, with speaking with for instance, with President Lula, President Dilma, and also now we were very hopeful that we could do it. And in fact, at the negotiating level, there was an agreement. But as you just said, there is now a further complication is about this issue about the environment and climate change. Further complication for this purpose, because the issue is a very important issue on its own merits. So there was an agreement in principle, but you know, that was negotiated by the European Commission. As you know, it's the European Commission that negotiates the agreements on behalf of all the European countries, European Union countries. But now it has to be approved and ratified. I don't think it is going to be, I'm no longer in office, so I'm going to be very blunt. I don't think it's going to be ratified or approved by the European Union precisely on the grounds of these environmental issues. Some people may say, oh, but traditionally, France, for instance, was always skeptical. So it's a disguised form of protection. Some people will say that. Frankly, I don't think this is the case. The fact is that the agreement itself on the issue of issues that are important from a trade perspective, difficult for France, like meat, beef, there was an agreement with concessions on both sides. But it's also true that, namely now, President Macron is very committed to the agenda, and not only in Mercosur, all over the world. And the European Union is now discussing about having a border adjustment tax, a kind of a carbon tax. This is going to be a very complicating factor. That's why one of the reasons why the European Union was so happy with the election of Biden was that he's already stated that one of his first decisions is going to go back to the Paris climate agreement, climate accord. by the way, I'm not sure that at the end the Congress, American Congress, will ratify it, because Clinton also signed Kyoto, but the reality is the Americans have never ratified any binding agreement important but in terms of climate change. That's the binding constraints. Okay. They are doing a lot in some areas, including through technology, but they do not accept until now that they should be subject to a kind of a worldwide constraints with targets, verifiable targets until now. And of course, without that, it's going to be very difficult. But at least Biden, through executive orders and joining the Paris Agreement, will create a new dynamic in this matter. So, and this is why Macron is sincere about that, and France. So, for instance, I don't think it is realistic to think until 2022 if there is no change. So ideally, and now that's an idea I'm going to give you, we could do as we have done with mutatis mutandis with Colombia and Peru, that I remember because I was part of that agreement. And at that time, the European Parliament was opposing the agreement on the grounds of lack of respect for social standards, namely in Colombia, because of the way to deal with the fights and so on. In fact, at that time, I spoke with Uribe and with the socialists in the European Parliament, and we found a compromise. And there was a kind of a roadmap parallel to the agreement, because if not, the European Parliament will not accept the agreement. And as you know, European Parliament can, it's necessary their vote in favor of any trade agreement. So it's not just the countries, it's European Parliament. And European Parliament, I'm absolutely sure, as the agreement is, in matters related to climate change, will not be able to accept it. So we need to find some creative way. Now, the ideal thing, now, with all respect for the Brazilian sovereignty that I really have, the ideal thing will be if the Brazilian government takes that decisions themselves. But to be honest, some of the news that were coming about the deforestation in Amazon were very badly received in some European and not only European quarters. So maybe we can, either there is a reopening of the agreement, I think it's difficult from a negotiating point of view. I don't know if the Brazilian side will accept it, or probably better, we can have either a protocol or a roadmap, something that reassures the opinion on issues of climate, understanding, of course, the full sovereignty of Brazil over the Amazon, the part of the Amazon that Brazil is responsible for. I'm saying that all the time to my friends in Europe. Be aware of the way you speak about that with Brazilians, because we will not accept that other countries tell us how to manage our own resources. So we have to do it in an intelligent way, respecting both sides. But if there is not a compromise on these issues, my very sincere answer, we are not going to see that agreement in the, I'd say, at least in the near term. And I'd like very much to see it will be one of the biggest free trade agreements in the world, having all the power of the European Union, economic power, and Brazil and the other countries of the Mercosur. So I think it will be transformational, that agreement, if you can do it. And I hope that we will do it, but we have still some hurdles.
Well, like you said, these things are, they zigzag, but hopefully at some point we reconnect. I have a few more questions. I also want to give Demetrio and Ronaldo a chance to ask follow-up questions, but let me try one more that comes from our own Ana Paula Tostes and also from Leonardo Dias. The two questions, in the two questions, I find the following three words: Turkey, Hungary, Poland. And I think you get my drift. I am one of those who believes that if the planet will develop wisely, peacefully, it will be necessary to deal with Asia through the very smart use of soft power. So in a way, we, the West, we need to demonstrate that life is better under our system under our rules. And this requires a certain discipline. And I think Europe is in a very important position. Clearly now, one hopes with Biden, there'll be added strength to approach this. But if I could ask you, again, being a bit nosy, how far do you think these local adventures can be tolerated by Europe?
Now, first of all, Turkey, as you know, it's not a European Union country. It's a NATO country, and it's a very important country from a European perspective. Yes. Geopolitically, in terms of defense, it's one of the biggest armies in Europe. In fact, probably the biggest in numerical terms, not counting Russia. But it's true, the developments there are of concern. I was some time ago, before COVID, I was with Erdogan. I know Erdogan well, even when he was mayor of Istanbul before becoming prime minister and then president. And I had a very, very open conversation with him, but it should remain personal. Anyhow, there is one thing that is now clear, and I can say that I'm no longer in official position. It's obvious that Turkey will not become a member of the European Union. There was a time where Americans and British and others were putting a lot of pressure to make Turkey a member of the European Union. And some people believe that it was a mistake not to do it. But frankly, I think that it is an illusion. It is an illusion to think that the European Union on its own will be the decisive factor for the change in Turkey. Turkey is a big, very big country with a great history. And the way they see themselves, it's a very proud country, is, of course, that their developments are basically, let's say, internally driven, from my point of view, than externally driven. Having said that, the reality is that they are not going.
We are losing you. I don't know if it's just me.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you? Sorry. Sometimes also when Dmitry was speaking, there was some small problems with the sound. So I was saying that Turkey will not become a member of the European Union. I would say never, because never say never in politics, but not in the foreseeable future. So this is an issue that we have to deal with in NATO. And I hope that Biden will help us address this issue, by the way, also with Europeans. But it's difficult. It's difficult. Hungary and Poland, it's a European Union issue, and I think it's going to be solved. It's very complex because, in fact, those countries are rejecting a linkage with the rule of law. And as you know, the rule of law is a basic principle of the European Union, Article 2nd of the Lisbon Treaty. Respect for human rights, freedom, democracy, rule of law, equality of rights between men and women, respect for minorities, and so on and so forth. So it's a condition. And those countries have signed, approved, and ratified the treaties. So now, but their argument, we have to understand also their arguments. I'm not saying that I agree, but the arguments they have, for instance, in Poland, is that there is now a liberal perception of these matters, politically correct, that tries to impose on some new kind of rights, from gay to abortion. For them, it's new. Ideas that they do not agree. You see? And culturally, there is a difference there. So I personally believe that it's solvable through dialogue and persuasion. There are many ways of persuasion in the European Union, many. Those countries are countries that benefit a lot from European Union solidarity. Poland is a country that receives more financial support from the European Union by far. And in relative terms, Hungary also receives comparable support. Public investment in Hungary, most of it comes from the European Union, not from the Hungarian budget, but from the European Union budget. So I think those countries will, of course, sooner or later come to a compromise. And that's what now, by the way, now Angela Merkel is doing. Because as you know, this time, until the end of the year, the rotating presidency of the European Council, of the Council of the European Union, is Germany. And Merkel, she's trying to find a solution there. So, but we are going to live with this issue for some time. And by the way, probably not only in Hungary and Poland. For instance, Slovenia already made a statement of solidarity with those two countries. But there are ways, some of them have to be discreet, but there are ways of coming to a compromise. And I believe this is necessary, of course. By the way, just to give an example, it's a different issue, but I like to remind people, when we have discussion about the fiscal compact, that was a precondition for Germany and other countries to make the support to the more vulnerable countries during the euro crisis. That was a precondition, but the United Kingdom said no. And also the Czech Republic at that time. It was David Cameron. And that treaty, to be a part of the European Union treaty, needed to be unanimity. So what happened? What happened was that we made the treaty outside of the treaty. But instantly, and so it's a pure intergovernmental treaty, the fiscal compact. But instantly, quite creatively, they gave the task to the European Commission and to the European Central Bank, the European Court of Justice, to implement that treaty, the European Commission, and as a court of appeal, it was the European Court of Justice. So two European Union institutions that were somehow responsible for a treaty outside of the European Union. So I'm saying that's why that could be a way, but that is an atomic bomb. I don't want it, a last resort. But the European Union has some mechanisms, including the mechanism of the so-called reinforced or enhanced cooperation, la coopération renforcée, enhanced cooperation, where if not all countries agree, those who agree can go forward, either through the European Union mechanisms or using their sovereign rights. They can also make an agreement by the side, you see. And I hope that will not happen. But if some countries in the European Union reject what is obvious, at some moment, the others will say, okay, you don't want to be, okay, but we are going to do that outside. In that case, you do not benefit from the money from the European Union. We suspend that part and we go through that. So there are many ways, creative ways, but I hope we are not going to come to that point because, by the way, Poland is an extremely important country for the European Union. In some ways, I understand, not on the issue of the rule of law, but I understand the concerns of Poland. We have to understand a country like Poland. Sometimes I say a little bit provocatively, if I were Poland or Polish, I will be probably I also be a little bit nationalistic. Because their history is a history of invasion from Russia and from Prussia. I mean, but at the same time, let me tell you this, I spoke very often with that late president that died in that accident. Twin brother of the current, let's say, more influential politician in Poland, Kaczynski. I had very deep conversations with him. Everybody, most people in Brussels were saying that guy is anti-European. He's a reactionary anti-European. He was very conservative, yes, very conservative, but he was not anti-European. He told me, if there is a European army, I want the Polish division to be the first to be given to the European Union, because we want to have a strong defense of Europe. So it is a man that is not, it is not the, let's say, the traditional right, center, civilized, center right we have in Europe, like DPP. But I will not call him anti-European. You can be very, very conservative and be pro-European, and you can be very left-wing and be pro-European. And this is the point we have to accept as well. We have to respect different options, of course, with some limits. The respect of rule of law is a precondition to be a member of the European Union. So if someone is not comfortable with that, should leave. As simple as that. That's the difference of the European Union with other. Why Portugal or Spain or Greece were not members of the European Union? it was because we were not democracies. Portugal was a member of the EFTA, European Free Trade Association. So it's a precondition to be a democracy and to show you are a democracy. So but we are going to come to some kind of compromise, creative compromise, I hope.
Thank you. Let me propose, we are at the hour, and I know you also have other commitments. We would keep you here for hours if we could, but we want you back, so we will try to respect the rules. I noticed our colleague Demetriou has unlocked his mic, so he may have a question. And I have one last question, and Ronaldo may also want to intervene. So I will pass on one quick question, is from our colleague, Ambassador Graça Lima, and it's basically the following. Can we see a compromise or solution to the tension between the common agricultural policy of Europe and WTO? Can WTO move forward given this very, very important and delicate matter? I know you could give us a lecture on that. If you could give us the short version, then I'll pass it on to my colleagues and we finish.
So thank you, Ambassador Graça Lima. By the way, I should have also said thank you to the other, namely my good friend Ana Paula Tostes, for the question. My short answer is yes. I think it can be done. Now there are no longer export subsidies to the European Union in agriculture, as you know. I mean, from the European Union. But it's true that the common agricultural policy remains very important in the European Union, even if it does not have the same level of financial commitment. But as we have seen now with Mercosur, it was possible to come to an agreement, unfortunately, for other reasons not yet done. But on the agricultural side, there was an agreement between the European Union and Brazil, where traditionally these were the most difficult issues in trade terms between Brazil and at least some European countries, like France or Ireland. They were the more difficult in the issues of, for instance, protection of the beef production in Europe and so on. So my short answer is yes, that requires negotiation. But frankly, I don't think the common agricultural policy is the biggest problem for WTO. By the way, I know well because she's the chair of Gavi. I'm now replacing her, the person, Dr. Ngozi, that is now going to be, hopefully, if the Americans lift the veto, she will become the Director General of WTO. She's very committed to make a huge reform. And the reason why WTO is paralyzed was basically because of the not commitment of the United States. And so we need now to look at all the issues. And by the way, the European Commission is now preparing a trade policy. It's going to come beginning of next year. It's being prepared how we can, together with others, hopefully with Brazil, but also with Americans and Japanese and all the others, how we can revive the WTO, namely in terms of rules and including the basic principles of most favorable nation and so on. These are issues that are, some of them are quite technical, but I believe it's important and it's critically important that we restore the effectiveness and credibility of the WTO that until now was put in question because of lack of commitment of some of the most important stakeholders. To be honest, not only the United States, but the fact is that the Americans try to solve issues outside of the WTO, and I think we should continue committed to the WTO.
So let me propose the following. I will say thank you right now. This has been wonderful. I will ask my two colleagues each to ask you brief questions, and then you can wrap it up. So spectacular. Many thanks. Ronaldo, first.
Yes, I have a quick question, Arminio. The strategic partnership between Brazil and the European Union signed in 2007, when you presided the European Commission, provides for holding of annual meetings. There has not been a meeting since then. We have gone through the second mandate of President Dilma, Temer's government, and now 2 years of Bolsonaro's government. Has there been a freezing of the relationship between Brazil and the European Union? And is there any hope for unblocking this situation in the short or medium term?
First of all, let me say, and it's not to avoid your very interesting question, I'm so committed to that because, as you were so kind to remind us, it was when I was in the Commission, and in fact, it was my initiative when I came to the Commission, I've asked, why do we have a strategic partnership, of course, United States, with Russia, China, Japan, Korea, and we don't have it with Brazil? And the answer was, that will not make other Latin American countries happy. And I said, I'm sorry, but Brazil is by far the biggest country in Latin America. It does not make sense that we have the so-called strategic partners for diplomatic purposes. In North America, we have in Asia, we have other parts of the world, but we don't have in Latin America. And then we came to that. By the way, sometime afterwards, the same status was accepted in diplomatic terms for Mexico. And I was so proud that we started those summits in Lisbon during the Portuguese presidency of the European Union at that time, 2007. Now, the honest answer to your question is, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. But I presume it has probably to do with less commitment with the current, let's say, leadership in Brazil. I presume, but I don't know. I'm very honest. I'm not following that closely. I regret it, by the way. I think I'm very institutionalist. I think we have to have relations independently, if we like or don't like the leaders of different countries. But sometimes with those summits happens, by the way, not only Brazil, it has happened with others, except with China. China, I'm going to tell you a story. China, there was 1 year where the Chinese want to punish France because Sarkozy and the wife of Sarkozy, Carla Bruni, they met the Dalai Lama. And it was when France was holding the rotating presidency. And so the Chinese said, we cannot make a summit with you, not because you, the European Union, but because of France. And so we will not make with France. But the following year, the Chinese asked to make 2 instead of 1 summit so that they could recover what was happening. So it's interesting to see how they think about it. So they want to every year. And it's been, with that exception, it has been so for many years now. But with other countries, by the way, with Russia, there are no longer summits, unfortunately, because of what happened. But even in the United States, sometimes, even with Obama, there was 1 year that was postponed. There was lack of interest or commitment. With India, it's also not very regular. So because the agenda is so crowded, so difficult, that it tends not to be, ideally it should be every year. But I want to tell you, it's not the only case. I don't know now if it is more on the European Union side or on the Brazilian side. I don't know. But on the European side, I'm being very candid with you. Frankly, there was probably not so much in commitment. And as you know, the final years of President Dilma, by the way, I was in several summits with President Dilma myself, but the final years and also the transition President Temer were difficult politically. And in that case, sometimes the temptation is to postpone. But maybe we can ask, and if you invite me once more in the future, I will ask my colleagues in the European Union if there is any specific reason for that, or if the reason is also, probably also in Brasilia, there is not the same commitment to multilateral, to the relationship with the European, I don't know. At least at the beginning, I had the idea, to be very frank with you, but you know better than me, being Brazilian, I think that there was a kind of enthusiasm, probably too much enthusiasm with President Trump. And that is a mistake. We cannot make our relations dependent on the temporary leader of one country. We have to think institutionally that at least that is my orientation. I'm sorry if this is not the orientation in Europe or if it is not the orientation in Brazil.
Thank you very much.
Demetri, please.
To be very short, I think the real problem with Hungary and Poland is not conservatism, it's not nationalism.
Sorry.
Hungary and Poland.
There he is.
Okay, when I talk about Orban, this happens.
Okay.
You're mute.
Is
Okay,
mute.
I was saying that when we speak about Hungary and Poland, there are problems, as you can see. I'm so sorry about the accent. Please.
The real problem is not nationalism, conservatism, abortion, gays. The real problem is the rule of law, separation of powers, the independence of judges, and freedom of press. So I think that's the issue.
Telling you what are the arguments they are using there. By the way, it was when I was in the commission, we have launched infringement procedures against Hungary. At that time, it was already Orban. And in fact, we won in the European Commission, won in the European Court of Justice. And with some delays, to be fair, the government of Hungary changed the law in accordance with the ruling of the European Court of Justice. But afterwards, there were other cases, and there are now also cases going against Poland. But I agree with you. The basic issue is this, rule of law. Anyhow, I was trying to explain that the way the issue is being presented in those countries is that there are some rights, new rights, that are difficult to accept in those countries for probably cultural reasons. Because let's not forget, these parties won the election and they won democratically. No one puts that in question. And there is some competition in those countries. By the way, Budapest, the opposition won. And Warsaw also, the opposition won. So I'm not trying I'm trying to understand. I'm not trying to justify the government. No, you know, I'm a liberal in the good sense of the word. I'm fanatically pro-freedom because I remember when my country, Portugal, was not free country until '74. So no doubt, but I'm trying to understand their position or what they present as their reason, because I think we have to have that debate with them in a way that we find a solution. And the solution, it has to be based on values and the principles of the opinion, including, I quoted to you, Article 2nd of the Lisbon Treaty, that is, I mean, replicating the original Rome Treaty of the opinion. So let's hope that we find a solution. Are we on time?
We are on sort of extended time, but it was well worth it. I know I speak on behalf of everyone that listened and on everyone at CEBRI when I say this was superb, and we really hope to have you back often. And many, many thanks. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Obrigado. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Tchau, pessoal.